Welcome to Word Plays, where you will hear stories celebrating the human spirit. My name is Kate Dudding. I'm one of the three producers of Word Plays. The other two, Siri Allison is with us today as one of our tellers, and Joe Doolittle is on a ferry either going to or from Martha's Vineyard, so he was unable to be with us. It's hard to believe, but we are starting our 15th season of Word Plays, the second one on Zoom. We are doing the best we can. We are taping this performance. Your names will not be visible if there's a group shot. We'd like you to be muted, except for the tellers. We want some live reactions, especially I found that if I tell a joke and I can't hear anyone laugh, it's very disconcerting. Or if I say something dramatic and nobody goes, again, it's like, I'm not sure anyone's listening. So I'm asking the tellers who feel they are in a noise-free environment to remain unmuted. We would like the listeners to remain muted. At the end of the story, you may unmute and clap, or you can clap this way, or you can mime clapping. So I think that's all the technical details. Oh yes, and the final one is Claire Nolan is once again being our technical guru and making sure that things are working right in the internet world, especially that she can control them. So today's topic is kindness. I've appreciated kindness that I have received during the pandemic, and I've been trying to share kindness. And so hopefully these stories will do us all good in many different ways. Now, I always ask the tellers a bizarre question, and their answers sort of string the stories together and hopefully pique your interest as you hear each one of their responses. Today's question was, if you could eat your story, what would it taste like? And Claire Nolan, who will be telling us a folktale from many cultures called The Three Golden Hairs of the Devil, says that her story would taste like a river flowing underground. Claire Nolan, please tell us more.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate, for that lovely introduction as always. And thank you for providing this platform for us to tell stories. And thank you to the audience and the other storytellers for being here with us today on this early fall day. So as Kate said, this story is The Three Golden Hairs of the Devil, which comes from many, many different cultures. This story begins once upon a time. Don't you love those words? Once upon a time. I was teaching a class last week and there was a man from Brazil and I said something about fairy tales and he said, "What is a fairy tale? What does that mean?" And I said, "Once upon a time." He understood immediately. So those are our favorite words. And I will begin my story. Once upon a time, there lived a young man named Jack. And Jack lived in the small village of Voorheesville, New York, not far from here. And Jack was in love. Jack loved a beautiful, kind, generous, sweet woman. And her name was Emily. So what could be wrong? Plenty. Because Emily, unfortunately, was an indentured servant. And she could not marry until the time of her indenture was finished, unless she could raise the money to buy her indenture from her master. Well, Jack decided that he would work hard and save his money, and he would help Emily. And it didn't take him long because Jack was a hard worker and he could save his money. And so one day when he had the amount needed, he went to that big white house in Voorheesville, and he went up the front steps to the front door, the big oaken front door, and he knocked hard on that door. He had a right to be there, and the door was opened to him by none other than Emily's master. "What do you want?" he said to Jack, and looked down at him, down his nose, down at Jack as though he were something that he had just scraped off his shoe. "What do you want?" And Jack said, "I'm here because I have raised the money needed to buy Emily's servitude from you." "Ha! She is not going anywhere. I will keep her until the last day and minute." But Jack said, I have the money. You can have it now. You won't have to wait." "No," he said, "Emily's not going anywhere, and I will not let her go, not for any sum of money, unless perhaps you bring me the 3 golden hairs of the devil." And then that man slammed the door in Jack's face. And Jack turned away dejected, and he went down the steps and out into the street, and he walked to a little park. It's still there. You can see it today. A green, a common, a lovely place in Voorheesville. And he sat down on a bench, and he put his head in his hands, and he wondered what he could do. What were the 3 golden hairs of the devil? How did one find them? Was it a metaphor? Did they actually exist? He had no idea. But then he noticed that someone was sitting there beside him on the bench. And he looked, and there was an old woman. And she reminded Jack of his own grandmother, who he hadn't seen since he was a little boy. And the woman looked at Jack kindly and said, "You seem very sad. What's wrong?" And Jack poured his heart out to this kind woman and told her everything. Told her about Emily and her servitude. Told her about how he had worked so hard to save the money. Told her about Emily's greedy and wicked master. Told her about the 3 golden hairs of the devil. Jack had lived an exemplary life, and he was not even sure if the devil actually existed. And the old woman had also lived an exemplary life, but she had lived much longer than Jack, and she was quite sure that the devil did exist. "Well," she said, "Jack, I can help you, I think. I have heard that the devil lives in Knox, down deep in the earth in those caves. If you can find the right cave and go down into the cave, deep into the earth, I think you will find the devil. And perhaps somehow, Jack, you can get those 3 golden hairs, and Emily will be your wife." Oh, Jack was delighted to think that here was his answer. "Oh, thank you," he said. "Thank you." And he jumped up. And when he turned, well, you guessed it, that woman who more and more was reminding Jack of his own grandmother was gone. Well, Jack went home and he packed a bag. And here's where I need your help. Tell me, what did Jack put into that bag? Just 3 items. He had to travel light. What is it that Jack put into his bag?
A flashlight?
A flashlight, an excellent item. Into the bag went the flashlight. Anything else?
Scissors?
A knife.
I heard scissors. I heard a knife. Anything else?
Food.
Food, yeah. Jack's
Oh,
going to need something to eat.
What about a rope so we could tie it to a tree outside, and like the Minotaur in the labyrinth?
Okay, wow. So of those 3 things, I think we'll take some food and water, the flashlight, and I heard scissors. So he had to get the golden hairs, yeah. So he put them into his bag with some other things, and he put the bag on his back. He couldn't say goodbye to Emily. She was busy working in that greedy rich man's house, and he set off to find those caves in Knox. He walked and he walked and he walked and he walked and he walked, and he came to another village, the village of Altamont. And Altamont, as you may know, is famous for its apples. And This was apple time when Jack arrived there. Just like now, the apples were getting ripe. But when he arrived in Altamont, the people there seemed very sad and dejected, and Jack wondered what was wrong. What's wrong? He said. Usually the people in Altamont are always so lively and happy. What's going on? And someone said, oh, Jack, you don't know what's going on. It's such a terrible thing. Our apples are not ripening. And she pointed out the beautiful tree, the biggest tree of all. And there, where that time of year, the tree should have been just covered with apples. The boughs should have been bending down toward the ground. There was hardly an apple on the tree, and the ones that were there were small and green and had little blotches on them, and nobody would want to eat those. Oh, said Jack, this is terrible. What are you going to do? We don't know what to do. We've tried everything. We've brought in every expert we can think of, and nobody seems to know the answer. Well, thought Jack, I'm going to find the devil. And the devil has seen a lot, I'm sure. And perhaps if I can talk to the devil, I can get the answer to your question. I can find out what is wrong with your apple trees. Oh, Jack, would you do that for us? Please, please. Oh, it would be so grand if you would do that for us. And Jack promised that he would. So off he went. He walked and 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 he came to the beautiful town of Bern. And Bern is famous for a river that flows through it, a small stream really, but it flows over a waterfall and the water is fresh and clear. And although Jack had some water in his pack, he saw that stream and he knew that that water was so fresh and tasty that he set down in his pack and he went to lean over the water and he put his hand in that water and he scooped up some and he was about to put that water to his lips when there was a hand on his shoulder and a man said, don't drink that water, Jack. Oh, why not? What's wrong with your water? We don't know. We do not know what's wrong with our water, but people are getting very sick when they drink the water, and some of them almost to the point of death. We have no idea what's wrong with our water. Oh, thought Jack, this is a problem. Have you asked anyone? Oh, we've had scientists in. They've been looking into the problem. Nobody seems to know what's wrong. Well, said Jack, I'm going to see the devil and I'm going to ask him about the apples in Altamont and perhaps I could ask him about the water. Maybe the devil who knows a lot can tell us what's wrong with your water. Would you do that, Jack? Would you do that for us? And of course, Jack would. Jack was a very kind young man. Well, they gave him a place to sleep and some food to replenish the food that he had already eaten in his pack. And he didn't get any water from the stream. He still had some water in his bottle. And early the next morning, he got up and he thanked his hosts and he set out. He set out toward Knox. When he reached Knox, he had to hunt around for the cave system. And he went into some that ended quickly and he went into others that were, well, he couldn't really go into them. They were too tight a squeeze, but finally he found one that he could squeeze down into. And when he got down into that cave, it opened up for him. It was quite dark, so he reached into his pack and he got out that flashlight and he started walking along that cave. It was quite a place. He could hear water dripping and he could see the rock formations, and he walked on and soon the path that he was on went downhill. He walked down, deeper and deeper and deeper into that cave until finally he came to an underground river. He had heard it for a long time, the flowing of that river. And when he reached it, he saw how wide it was and how deep, and he wondered how he would ever get across that river. Well, he didn't have to wonder very long, because soon a man came with a small boat, and he was poling that boat with a long, sturdy pole. And he stopped when he reached where Jack was standing, and he asked him, "Would you like to get across the river?" Jack said, "Yes. Can you take me?" The man said, "Of course. Hop on. It'll cost you." Well, Jack had some money in his pocket. He paid the man, and the man started off across the river. And as he poled across the river, he told Jack his story. He said he'd been poling across that river for much longer than he could remember. He had lots of money, but No place to spend it there underground, and no way to stop poling the river. There was every time poling across the river, every time he tried to stop, something would force him back onto that boat. Well, said Jack, that is a problem. It certainly is, said the man. I'd like to leave this place and go up above ground and find a nice young woman and get married and have children. But every day I wake up the same on this boat. Well, said Jack, I'm going to see the devil. And I'm sure the devil will know what to do. Well, the man thanked him and he said, look at all the money I have. I can pay you handsomely if you will tell me the answer to my problem. And Jack promised that he would. And when they reached the other side, Jack waved to the man and set off on the path that led him directly to a big door. The door was so big, Jack could barely see the top of the door high up above him. And Jack knocked on the door, and he knocked as hard as he could, and he heard the echo inside behind that door. It boomed loudly. And then the door began to open. And there, in front of Jack, was a curtain of fabric. He tried to push it aside, and he heard, hey, what's going on down there? And Jack looked up, and it was not a curtain. It was the skirt of the tallest woman Jack had ever seen, looking down on Jack. And Jack looked up at the woman, and the woman looked down at Jack, and Jack looked up and said, are you the devil? Oh, the woman laughed. No, said the woman, I'm not the devil. No, I'm his mother. So Jack had just met the devil's mother. Come in, she said, come in. And Jack went in. He followed her. Jack was so tiny that the woman scooped him up and placed him on the table so they could look at each other a little more easily. And the woman said, what are you doing here? Don't you know that my son, the devil, would eat you as quick as that? No, said Jack, I had no idea that the devil would eat me. Well, he would, said the woman. We're going to have to hide you somewhere because he's coming home for his dinner quite soon. Well, said Jack, where will you hide me? And she looked around, and there on a high shelf was her teapot, her best teapot that she rarely used. And she picked Jack up, and she took the lid off the teapot, and she placed him inside, and she put the lid back on. Stay as quiet as you can, she said, because my son will be home quite soon. Well, Jack didn't have to wait long. Very soon he heard the creaking of that big door, and this time it shut, boom, and shook the entire underground house. And in came the devil. Jack couldn't see him because he was inside the teapot, but he could hear him. And the devil said, what's going on here? I smell man. Where is he? Is that what you're cooking for my supper? Oh, said his mother, there's no man here. You smell the man we had for dinner yesterday. No. Now go wash your hands. Supper will be ready soon. And supper was a big pot. And in that pot was chickens and goats and sheep and a cow, all that had been taken from the farms nearby. And they were cooked up in that pot. And it smelled so good to the devil that he almost forgot that he really wanted to eat a man. Well, the devil ate his dinner, and it was delicious. And then because he had had so much to eat in such a long day, he was getting kind of tired. So he said, I think I'll take a little nap. And his mother said, that's a good idea. You lay down on the sofa. And while you lay down on the sofa, I'll comb your hair because it's full of tangles and burdocks and all kinds of leaves and twigs. And He lay down on the sofa and she pulled up a chair next to him and she took out her little comb and she started to comb his hair. And while she combed his hair, she sang a little lullaby that she had been singing to the devil since he had been just a little teeny imp. And she sang and she combed and she combed and she sang. And while she combed and sang, the devil soon started to snore. And that's when she found the first golden hair and she plucked it out of his head and she set it aside. But that woke him up. He said, "Hey, what are you doing? That hurt. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but your hair is just full of snarls. I had to comb one out. That must have been what woke you up. But while you're awake, I want to tell you, you see, I had a dream," because Jack had told her everything before he went into the teapot. So she was going to tell the devil. She said, "I had a dream just last night. I wanted to tell you about this dream. I dreamed that there was a village that had trees, and these trees should have had apples, but there were no apples on the trees. What do you think was the problem?" Said the devil. "Oh, those stupid people. Don't they know all they have to do is dig down under the tree and they're going to find a little mouse that's gnawing on the roots, and that's why that tree will not produce any fruit." "Oh," she said, "that's very interesting. Now let me sleep. I'm very tired." And he lay back down again and she combed his hair and she sang that lullaby and soon he was sound asleep. And then pluck, she pulled the second golden hair. Hey, what's going on? That hurt. Oh my goodness, the burdocks in your hair," she said. "I'm having such a hard time getting my comb through. But while you're awake, the night before last, I had a different dream." And she told him all about the town that had water, the river flowing through it. The water was making people sick. What could have been causing that? "Ha," he said, "those stupid people. Don't they know that there are beaver up above the stream and they built a dam and they are filling that river with their poop and beaver fever. And that's why the people are getting sick. All they have to do is kill the beavers and destroy the dam and they will solve their problems." Oh, she thought, that's very interesting. And she started to comb his hair again and sing the lullaby. And soon he was sound asleep until she found the third golden hair. And he was awake again. What is going on here? That's the third time you woke me up and that hurt. Oh, she said, the night before last, I had a different dream. And I dreamed that there was a man who was poling across a river and he had no idea how to stop, that he had to always take people across and he could never be free himself. Oh, that stupid man. Doesn't he know that all he has to do is when he ferries someone across, jump off the boat first, hand that person the pole, and he'll be free. And that person will be captured and have to stay on the boat for as long as it takes to find another person to take the pole. Simple as that. Now let me sleep. And this time she sang her lullaby and combed his hair until he was truly asleep and snoring. And then she went over to the teapot and she tapped on it gently and she took off the top and Jack climbed out and she said, "Shh, don't say a word." She gave him the 3 golden hairs and Jack climbed down the table and he ran to the door, which she had left open a little bit so that creaking wouldn't wake up her son. And he went out and he went down toward the river and there the ferryman was waiting for him. And Jack jumped on the ferry and the ferryman started to pole him across and he said, "Well, what did the devil say? Did the devil tell you how I can become free?" And Jack said, "Yes, the devil did tell me, but I won't tell you till we get across to the other side." And when they got to the other side, Jack jumped off the ferry and he told the man that the next person who came along, make sure that you jump off first and give him the pole. And that person will be captured and you will be free. Oh, thank you. That's all I had to do. Oh, you have saved my life. And he had so much money, he had no place to spend it. He gave Jack 2 big bags of heavy gold coins. And Jack had to carry them up out of the cave and into the fresh air again. Well, Jack carried that money and the 3 gold hairs of the devil all the way to Bern. And when he got to Bern, the people were waiting for him. Look, it's Jack. There's Jack. He's coming. Jack. Did you find the devil? Did you ask him about our problem? And Jack explained everything that he heard the devil say. And sure enough, up above, there was a beaver dam. And sure enough, there were some beaver lodges. And they did destroy them, but they didn't kill the beavers. Oh no, they let them go in another part of the forest because the people of Bern are very kind and would never hurt a little animal. And they were so thankful. They gave Jack another big bag of money. Now Jack had 3 big bags of money that he had to carry all the way to Altamont, where the people were waiting for him anxiously. They saw him coming down the road. They cheered, they yelled, Jack's here, Jack's coming. Oh, Jack, do you know the answer to our problem? Let me sit down, let me rest, said Jack. Yes. And he explained that if they would dig under the tree, they would find a little mouse chewing on the roots. And if they could remove that mouse, their problem would be solved. And sure enough, they dug right away. And there was that little mouse. And they caught the little mouse in a shoebox. But they didn't kill the mouse because the people of Altamont are just as kind as the people of Bern. No, they brought it to this elementary school where the mouse became the mascot of the 3rd grade class. And then Jack, because he had now 4 big bags of money, which he couldn't possibly carry by himself, the kind people of Altamont loaned him a cart and a horse. And Jack went off back to Voorheesville as fast as he could. And he pulled up in front of that big white house. And he went up to the front porch and he banged on the door. Well, Emily's master had seen Jack coming. And he saw Jack coming with a horse and cart. Where did Jack get a horse and cart? He had no money. And Jack, he opened the door and he said, Jack, where have you been? And what do you have? And Jack held out the 3 golden hairs of the devil. And he said, now I can marry Emily and she will be free. And the master took those 3 golden hairs and marveled at them. He didn't even really think they existed. Jack, where have you been? And what do you have? And out there in the cart, he could see those bags. He said, what's in those bags? Oh, said Jack, those bags are filled with gold coins that I found deep in the cave of Knox. If you go down there, I think you might be able to cross a river and find your own fortune. Oh. Well, that master didn't have to be told twice. He did not even wait to grab his hat. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't grab any torches or food or water or scissors or anything. He just ran as fast as he could to Knox. And as far as I know, he's still there, poling across that river. But I know this story is true because if you go to Voorheesville and you find the White House and you go up those steps and knock on that oaken door and ask the people who live there, they will show you the 3 golden hairs of the devil.
Oh. Thank you, Claire Nolan, for starting us off with such a lively tale full of kindness, except at the end. That was oh, thank you so much. Our next storyteller is Priscilla Sprague from Schenectady. She will be telling us a personal story called The Clock. When I asked her about what her story would taste like, she said, a Cinnabon roll. I'm getting hungry. Tell us more, please.
Hi. The picture of the roll that I have is that I usually start at the bottom and maybe put some and have the roll, and it's at the end of it when I get to the amazing Cinnabon part. So it's not a sweet story, I don't think. So I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, and we're about 2 years apart. in age. We're all in our 70s now, and my little brother Ben and I we're rough with each other. But I wanted to tell you the story of when we were younger kids and what happened one time. So we moved in the spring of, I think it was 1955 or 56. And we moved from a small town where my parents knew everybody and the grandparents had lived there and so on. And we moved outside of Philadelphia to Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, where it was a suburb of Philadelphia, and there were no fields to run in and that sort of thing that I was used to. There were lots of people. I didn't know anybody. None of us did. So I'm glad we got there at the end of the school year so we could get to know some of the kids. And then in the fall, Ben was going to go to kindergarten. And so off he went to school, came home at lunchtime. It was a half-day kindergarten, and he was mad. He was really mad, and he was mad at my mother and mad at all of us. And so Mom asked him what was wrong, and he said, "You said when I went to school, they would teach me to read. They didn't teach me to read. I stayed there all the whole day." So my mother tried to explain to him that it would take a little while to learn to read. And he said, "We didn't do anything. I'm not going back." So when I got home from school after my full day there, Ben was sitting on the couch, kind of grumpy. And so we talked for a little while, and I said I would help him read. So a couple, maybe a month later, it was still hurricane season, and they sent us all home. They sent the kindergarten kids home. They all took the bus home, which they normally didn't do. And then they got the younger kids going, and finally the older ones of us. And my friend Edie and I walked down the driveway, turned out, and were walking along the front of the school when the wind was awful, and there had been lots of rain and so on, and a tree fell down and knocked us to the ground. But fortunately, there were enough branches on one side and the root at the other side so that the tree didn't just smish us. So we were scraped up and we went on home. And the couch, Ben was sitting in the couch when I got home, and I was all upset. And he said, "What's the matter, Pris?" And I said, "Well, a tree knocked us over." So my mother came zipping out of the kitchen and wanted to know. And those were the days of mercurochrome. So I got mercurochrome on my elbows and big patches and on my knees. We all had to wear skirts in those days, the girls. And so I got some TLC, and Ben was really nice to me, and he read me a story. He just took out a book and he would turn the pages, and there weren't any pictures, but he would tell the story. And then a while later, after the weather got nice, we had Ben went off and played with his friend, and they decided they would chop a tree down. They couldn't push one over. They had been trying ever since the hurricane. They just couldn't do it. So they decided they would chop it down. So he's got this little shovel about like this, and it's bent and rusty and all that because it had been used by 3 kids. And Ben was chopping away, and Joey was chopping away, and then Ben chopped away and he whacked it back onto his forehead. So the older kids ran to the house and told my mother how Ben was dying of exsanguination because he had hit his head with his shovel, and the blood was just coming out. He was going to die. So my mother ran down. I was home at the time. I ran down, and she had a dish towel over her shoulder. She normally did. She grabbed it and got the blood finally to stop just gushing. And they wrapped the towel around his head, and some women had shown up with safety pins, and Mom took him to the hospital and got stitches and tetanus shots and brought him home. And so he came in, he was pretty grumpy. He said, "They hurt me." I said, "Oh, honey, what happened?" So he told me, and he told me about chopping down the tree, and we discussed about that. I said, "What did they do to you?" Now he had this big bandage on his head, and he said, they did stitches. I said, "Oh, Ben, wow, you're going to be a hero." He said, "What?" And I said, "Well, you don't just get stitches. You have to be a hero. First, you have to get damaged." Skin was ripped and the blood came flushing out. I said, "You're a real hero, Ben." "Oh." And I said, "And you got a tetanus shot too?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, did you scream?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, Ben, I didn't get a tetanus shot yet. I didn't get stitches yet. You're a hero before me." Ben. So by then he was sitting, his shoulders were back up, and he was excited. And I said, "Since you're the hero, can you read me a story?" So he made up a story and read me the story. And then we were just talking and kind of leaning on each other, because before I had the tiny damage, and here he was all bandaged up and everything. So we talked about what we wanted for Christmas. And Ben wanted big pencils. So I said, "Big pencils?" He said, "Yeah, with big points, because every time I use a pencil, I break the point. And I want big pencils so it won't break." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want a clock." He said, "Oh." So that was all. We didn't go into grand detail or anything like that. And I thought, that's a big pencil. So my grandfather was a cabinet maker, and I called him up and asked him where I would get big pencils. And he told me to go down to Arthur's hardware store, and Mr. Arthur would get me big pencils. So I did. So he did. And they were flat, and they had square ends. Okay. And then he got me a big pencil, and it was maybe this size. Well, I wasn't this big then, but a bigger pencil. I thought, okay. And they had cut off sides as well, ends. So we went through the fall, and there were no more tree incidents. And we had Ben writing his numbers and learning his letters, and all three of us were excited for Ben to read. And he kept getting ahead of the teacher, who asked my mom to slow down, please, because he was annoying the other kids. And my mom said, "No, he came to school to learn to read, and that's what he's doing." So Christmas came, and by then I had gotten the pencils, and I also thought, if I get him a shirt, he won't like that. But I can wrap the pencils up in the shirt, and then he'll think that he got a shirt, and then he'll have the pencils. So Granny and Granddaddy were there, and the four of us and the two parents, and we were opening presents, and Ben got mine, and he picked it up and he said, "Did you get them?" I said, "Just open your present, Bennett. You'll like it." He said, "I don't want a shirt." So he opened up, and there was a shirt. And he said, "Thank you for the shirt." "You're welcome." I said, "Open it up. Let me see it." So he opened the shirt, and the pencils fell down, and he was delighted. And he said, somebody has to sharpen them. So Granddaddy, by chance, pulled out his pen, I'm sorry, his knife, his pen knife. And he said, come on over and I'll show you how. So the package giving continued, and we had, Dad handed me a kind of a smushy package, and okay. So I was opening it and opening it and opening it. It had lots of paper. And in the paper was a little plastic clock about this big around. It was pink and green, and it had a plastic cover. And there was a string coming from it and a little blob at the end of the screen of the string that no one could plug in and get electrocuted with. And the hands had, they were one piece of plastic. So whenever they both tipped. So I didn't have to worry. As long as I knew all the times for that angle, I was fine. But I could never get midnight or 6 o'clock, any of that. So the two middle kids said, well, it won't work. It's not a real clock. I said, it is a real clock and it will work and I love it and it's the perfect colors. And so Ben was really pleased that I liked it. And even when he found out that it really didn't plug in and it really didn't work as a clock, he realized that I just loved it. And it was right there on my desk the whole time I was in school. And Ben always had really great, thoughtful gifts. And one of the last ones I remember was that I needed a file cabinet. Well, he bought me a bedside, a chair side cabinet. And I could pull out the drawer and I could put in legal or regular files, whichever ones I wanted. It had to be put together. So he sat there with me and we put it together. And ever since the beginning, it's been like that. I know we're going to fix the bit of struggle we're having with right now because he's kind and good. And I love him.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla, for bringing us back to the 50s and to the joy of things like big pencils and clocks that didn't actually work, but were given with such a kind heart that were very meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Siri Allison from Salem is our next teller. She's going to tell us a Rumi story. Old story that she says tastes like rotten apples. Ooh. Siri, please tell us more.
Okay, well, first I want to say, Priscilla, I can tell you're a good big sister, and I would think that's the other reason that you are going to work out whatever it is. That was inspiring because I'm a big sister too, but I don't think I would have had the presence of mind at 5 years old or 10 years old, whatever it was you were when you were talking about him being a hero. So that was great. Yes, this is a Rumi story. Rumi is a poet, a Persian poet from the 13th century, so the 1200s. And I don't know very much about him at all, but I have this book, Rumi's Tales from the Silk Road. And this is a woman named Kamla Kapoor, and she has taken some of his poems, which evidently have stories within them, and adapted them. So this is her adaptation of a Rumi story that she found within his poems, and I have adapted a little further. And if I was now choosing it, now that I've worked with this story, I wouldn't have chosen it for this topic, I don't think. The outline, which is what I knew, I thought, oh, that's an interesting take on kindness. But now that I'm working with the story a little bit, I realize the depths of it more. It's a Sufi story. And I think it's got a lot of wisdom in it, but also maybe it's a kind of dangerous story in a way, I think. Anyway, so see what you think. It's a lot to think and talk about, I think, this story. All right, Ahmed. Ahmed was tired of walking. He was on the last leg of his homeward journey, and he would be home if all went well tomorrow, and that was a good thing because he was tired. He had started this journey very enthusiastically because he loved the days of walking, because Ahmed loved to think about things, to ruminate, to philosophize within himself about things like, the purpose of existence or the nature of God, things that in the ordinary hustle and bustle of life, it was very hard to find time to think about. So he had enjoyed these leisurely days of thinking and walking, but now he was tired. It was a nice day, at least. An autumn afternoon. He had just passed a really nice orchard where the apples had mostly been picked. And now he was walking by a willow tree, and the branches were hanging down and swaying in the breeze. And the light was going through the leaves. It was dappled under that willow tree, the light, and the grass. Oh, he thought, that grass is so soft and the dappled light so sweet. I'm just going to walk under there and sit down and take a rest. So he sat down on that soft grass and he leaned against that massive trunk. And almost immediately he fell into a deep sleep. The open mouth, snoring sleep of the very, very tired. Well, sometime later, we don't know how long, he was dragged very unpleasantly back to consciousness by what he thought must be a nightmare. But when he opened his eyes, there was a man he had never seen before hitting him, just pounding on him. Who are you? What are you doing? The man didn't answer. His eyes bulged with rage and he just kept pummeling Ahmed. Oh, what have I done to deserve this, thought Ahmed. God, he thought, what have I done to deserve this? Have I sinned? I'm a good man. I've never harmed anyone. Why are you punishing me? That was what his mind was doing, while his body was squirming out from underneath the man, pushing the man away, getting him to run. Ahmed was running back into the orchard through the apple trees. He thought that he had outrun the man, and he rested against an apple tree, just gasping for breath, when someone grabbed him from behind, and oh no, it was that same deranged man. And the man now had a sword and was pointing it right at Ahmed's throat. Eat, said the man. Eat, said Ahmed. Eat, said the man. And he pointed to the fallen apples that were now rotting on the ground. Ahmed reached down and picked the least rotten of the apples, and he took a little bite. No, said the man, eat. And he pushed Ahmed down to the ground, and then the man got down on the ground with him and began to stuff apples in Ahmed's mouth. Mealy, soft, squishy, fermenting, dirty, fly-covered, mouse-eaten, bird-pecked, horrible apples, just stuffing them into Ahmed's mouth. Ahmed wanted to ask him, why? But he couldn't speak. His mouth was stuffed with apples. This was absurd. And come to think of it, his mind began to replay all the misfortunes that had happened to him in his life. And, well, they were absurd, really. Yes, that's what life was, a series of meaningless, senseless sufferings. He wanted to curse the guy, but he was chewing as fast as he could so he wouldn't choke on the apples. So just inwardly, he said to God, curse this man, curse him, curse him. The man suddenly changed tactics and he pulled out a whip. Run, he demanded. And so Ahmed began to stumble away, trying to run. His mind hazy, confused, his body exhausted, his stomach bloated with apples, bruised and bleeding from his head to his feet. He ran as fast as he could. The man behind him, run, run. This went on for over an hour. Finally, they came to a stream. Man, drink! And Ahmed got down on his hands and his knees and began to lap the water like an animal. Drink, yelled the man, more, more, more. Ahmed drank until he could not drink another drop. Then he sat back. He crawled some ways up the bank. And he threw up everything that was in his stomach. He thought, I'm going to die. That's what life is, a series of senseless sufferings, and then you die. He looked up at the man. I'm going to die, he said. All right, I know I'm going to die, but I would die much more easily if you would please explain to me why. The man didn't say anything, but he pointed to Ahmed's vomit. And there, in the midst of the chunks of rotten apple, writhed a snake, a live snake, very slender, but over a foot long. Kind of stunned the snake was, but moving around, its tongue coming out. The stranger said to him, you know, I was riding by when I saw this snake slither into your open, snoring mouth. And this was the only way I could think of to get you to vomit it up. Well, why didn't you just tell me, said Ahmed. I would have done everything you asked, but done it so much more easily if I had understood the reason why. If, said the man, I had told you that you had swallowed a live snake, you would have been so frightened that you would have either fainted or just frozen in place. In neither case could you have vomited up this snake, and so you would have died of your fright. This was the path of lesser suffering. Ahmed crawled over to the man until he was kneeling at his feet. Earlier, he said, in my soul, I cursed you, but now I thank you. Bless you for seeing me. Bless you for inflicting the suffering that has saved me. And that is the end of the Rumi story called You Never Know Why.
Oh,
Thank you.
wonderful.
Oh my goodness.
What a story. So it seems to me partly wise and partly dangerous.
Mhm.
It's very much about kindness.
It's very much about kindness, but the man has decided, yeah, I mean, you could translate this to, I mean, there's such a thing as tough love, right? But it's very dangerous to decide for someone else what that tough love must be that they have to go through. That could justify all kinds of things, don't you think? However, a person learns from suffering. If you look at it that way, you're going to get through it much better. And so,
like most Sufi stories, they are complex and they will probably stick with us and for quite a long time. But I'll remember not to fall asleep outside with my mouth open. At the very least. Thank you so much, Sarah.
yeah, thank you.
Our next teller is Beverly Schwartz. She's going to share a personal story called The Kindness of Mrs. Solomon. And she said her story would taste like sweet chocolate. Not a tinge of snake at all. Beverly, tell us your story, please.
I was sitting in show and tell in a circle in Mrs. Solomon's second grade classroom. Mrs. Solomon asks, does anybody have anything to share? And Katie, one of the twins in our schools, raised her hand. Her sister's name was Sharon, and she was in another class. Well, she said, this coming Saturday, in 2 days from now, it's going to be my sister's and my birthday. And I'm having a party, and so is she. And we can't wait for our friends to come to our party. Oh, said Mrs. Solomon, who's going? And every single girl in the circle raised her hands real high. But me. I wasn't upset. I did not like the Katie twins. I was with them since kindergarten, and I just never got along with them. Why should I waste my Saturday going to a party when I could be doing fun things with people I like? So it didn't really faze me. And I saw Mrs. Solomon look around the room, and I saw her looking at me like, are you going to raise your hand, Bev? I didn't have to. I wasn't invited. Well, we went on for show and tell, and we went back to our seats, and I had a wonderful day. And the next morning was Friday, and I came to school, and on my desk was a very pretty colored envelope with crayons of all different colors. And I opened it up, and I looked, and it was an invitation to the Katie twins' birthday party. I did not want to go. And then I realized what happened. Mrs. Solomon had probably asked them to invite me since I was the only girl that hadn't been invited. Maybe they forgot to invite me, but I knew they hadn't. Well, I took it home Friday evening. Both my parents worked, so I had to wait till they got home. And I said to my mother, I've been invited to this party. And I told her the story. And I told them, I don't like them. I don't really want to go. And she said, well, Bev, you have to make up your mind, because if you are going, then we have to get a present or find a present or make a present for her. It's Friday night. Most of the stores are starting to close now. Oh, what am I going to do? She goes, let me know. So I walked up into my room and I sat there. What was I going to do? Mrs. Solomon had been so kind. She went out of her way to get me invited. She had no idea I did not like them. I went down the stairs and went up to my mom and said, Mom, I think the right thing to do is to go to the party because Mrs. Solomon went out of her way to be kind to me. Okay, then we have to find a birthday gift. But it's late. All the stores are closed and the party is first thing in the morning. I have an idea, Bev. You collect silver dollars that your uncles give you every time you visit. And you have 4 silver dollars now. Why don't we take 2 of them and give 1 to each of the Katie twins? My silver dollars? You want me to give my silver dollars, my precious silver dollars to them? Well, can you think of anything else? My mother said. No. So we went into my little treasure box, as I called it, and I took out 2 beautiful silver dollars. And we put them in envelopes, and I wrote a note to them. And we went the next morning to the party, and she dropped me off. They were greeting everyone at the door when I came. And I said, happy birthday. And I gave them each their envelopes, my beautiful silver dollars in them. They said, thank you. And I skedaddled into the house. Now, I had a good time at the party because I liked everyone else and they were my friends. But in the back of my mind, they got my silver dollars and I hate them even more. Well, I left. I thanked them very much for a nice party. And they said, thank you for your gift. And the next Monday when we went to school, Mrs. Solomon put up the helping hands and I became the leader for the day. So I got to walk next to Mrs. Solomon when we went to lunch. Well, we're walking up the ramp towards the cafeteria and I took Mrs. Solomon's hand. Mrs. Solomon, and I had never said anything like this except to my mother, I love you. And she nodded and I nodded. She knew what I was saying to her. I said, Mrs. Solomon, I decided what I'm going to be when I grow up. And she said, what? I said, I'm going to be a second grade teacher.
Oh.
And Mrs. Solomon said, oh, how nice. I think you'd make a great one, Bev. Well, I always took notes of all my teachers or their bulletin boards and what they did and all their projects. I joined Future Teachers of America when I got to high school. I went to college and got my teaching degree, and I took extra courses to graduate early. And it was the Friday before New Year's. I picked up the phone and I called the superintendent's office and I said, you know, I've been student teaching in your city since September. And I would like to interview for a job if you had a job or substitute. And this man started talking to me, asking me questions on the phone. And we had a great time. It was about an hour conversation. And he said, do you think you can come over to this office for a formal interview? And I said, well, will the superintendent be there? I am the superintendent, he said to me. Oh, I was so honest with him. Well, I said, I sure. So I went over, and after another 40 minutes or so, he said, I know it's Friday, but we have a job in the elementary school that you can start on Tuesday after New Year's. It's a second grade. I won the lottery. My dream of not only being a teacher, but being a second grade teacher came true. And then I walked in the first day, and half an hour before the kids were going to come. And I knew what I was going to do. I was going to be as kind as I could to my kids, like Mrs. Solomon had been to me. Thank you.
What a lovely story, Bev. And
Thank you.
and Mrs. Solomon, I had some teachers like her, and we were blessed when we had teachers like that.
And to this day, I still have the 2 remaining silver dollars.
Good for you. I had 2 silver dollars, and heaven knows where they are now.
They're in my little box still in my bedroom.
And you can bring them in for show and tell another day. Yes.
I would bring them into the class too. And they're 1890 and 1895 is the dates of my silver dollars.
Oh. Great. Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
Now, to end this half of the program, we have Christy Keegan from Saratoga Springs, also sharing a personal story whose title is, Sometimes I'm so right, I'm wrong.
Oh.
And wait, it gets even better. When I asked her what her story would taste like, she said, crow fricassee. So, not a lot of sweetness, at least during part of the story. Christy, are you there?
Here, I'm here. Can you see me? I can see you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can only see 3 of the audience at the moment, but
I'm
Claire Nolan will highlight you and poof, you
There we
will
go.
appear.
There you go.
Sorry, I couldn't find her either. Sorry,
And
Christy.
I have been here since the beginning, and that's how old I feel. I have been here. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I tell sweet stories, but let's see. My sister Marcy was born in 1955, just 2 weeks after my 5th birthday. This was the gift I had been begging my mother for 2 years, a baby sister. But she was a preemie and really, really tiny, so she didn't come home for a couple of months. But I remember when my grandmother handed her to me, I held that little baby in my arms, and I felt her little fingers and her little toes and the soft skin of her cheek. Oh, and she had this wonderful mop of brown hair and these huge brown eyes, and I fell in love with her. I loved my baby sister fiercely. By the time she was 1 year old, my mother realized that she was nothing like me. By the time she was 2 years old, the doctor realized she wasn't really like anybody. And by the time she was 3 years old, in 1958, she was diagnosed with autism, a word that the medical profession labeled her with, but that they had no understanding of whatsoever. It mattered not a whit to me. I loved her. So while my mother hied her from one specialist in Manhattan to another, I continued to love her fiercely. She was incredibly smart. She spoke in full sentences at 1, although she didn't walk until 4. But when she got to school, it felt like she had found a little bit of a niche where her brain was working. But she struggled, my quirky little sister. I was in the same school, and by the time she got to 1st grade, I was in the 6th grade on the 3rd floor. And every once in a while, when her head couldn't wrap itself around some shift in circumstance or change, she would clench her hands and she would let out a scream, or she would flap her hands. And the phone in my classroom would ring. And my teacher would pick it up and he would nod his head. And then he would look at me and out I would go down 2 flights of stairs and down the hall to my sister's classroom. And when I got there, I would wrap myself around her and hold her tight against my chest and whisper, "Kitten, it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay." And after a while, I would feel her body relax and her breathing return to normal, and I could go back to class. But then my parents moved, and suddenly, while my sister could still walk to the elementary school in our new town, it was a block from the house. I was in junior high school. I got on a bus and went to the next town every morning. And it was a big thing for me. It was a big adjustment, just like it was for my sister. And I somehow lost track of how hard it must have been for her. Until spring of that first year, when my sister Marcy came home, and I could tell she'd been crying. "Oh, kitten, come here, sweetie, come here." And she kind of folded herself up on my lap, and I wrapped my arms around her the way I always did. "What's the matter?" She looked at me. "Nobody will walk to school with me. And nobody will sit with me at lunch. And they will play with me. And I don't understand why. I don't do anything wrong. But Ellen told everybody that I'm crazy and it's catching. And if they play with me, they'll be crazy too. Is that true?" Oh, my 14-year-old heart. All I can think of to do was hug her and say, "Of course it's not true. I play with you all the time and I'm not crazy, right?" Which made her laugh, but her eyes were still so sad. Ellen. Ellen was the neighborhood bully. She lived right across the street from our house. She was a lumpy, dumpy sort of kid, a year or two older than my sister, with a kind of potato face and wannabe blonde hair and kind of little squishy eyes and a permanent scowl. She didn't just bully my sister, she bullied everyone who was smaller than her, which was almost everyone, because she was bigger than everybody in her class and even bigger than me, which ruled out my beating her up. Plus, if I had taken to brawling, my mother would have, into next week. I thought about what to do. I knew the right thing to do was to tell my mother, who would talk to Ellen's mother, who would talk to Ellen. And I knew that for about a minute, my sister's life would be much better. But I had learned by 14 that adults were not really very good at resolving this kind of thing. So I kept thinking. And I thought, 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 and I came up with a plan. Now, this was about 3 weeks before Easter. And so that Saturday, I gathered up all my art supplies and I spent the entire afternoon carefully cutting out fold-over egg-shaped invitations to the first ever Keegan egg hunt and roll. And then I addressed them and I'd hand delivered them to every single child in the neighborhood, except Ellen. Now, I didn't just put them in the mailbox, and I certainly didn't hand them to the kids. Oh, no, no, no. I knew enough about my neighborhood to realize that for most families, Easter was a major holiday. And most parents, especially moms, would be really happy to have their kids out of the house on the Saturday before, which is when the party was planned for. And so I handed the invitation to the moms, who immediately said, of course, my kid will come. Early the Saturday before Easter, I got up and I hid the dozens and dozens of eggs that I had dyed and decorated. And I put out jars of jelly beans that kids would win if they guessed the right number. And I had little foil covered chocolate eggs. And I had bought those beautiful sponge sugar diorama eggs where you could see the little scene inside as prizes for whoever rolled the egg the longest and whoever didn't break the egg and whoever found the most eggs. I even baked 2 bunny cakes, Easter bunny shaped cakes from the Betty Crocker cookbook for children. It was a fabulous party. Everybody had a great time and everybody was nice to my sister. And by the time the last kid left and we were waving goodbye, my sister's face was just a smile from ear to ear. And on the first school Monday after that Easter, a little girl from around the corner and down the block knocked on our front door to see if my sister wanted to walk to school with her. But I was not a girl to rest on her laurels. No, I knew Ellen well enough to know that it was probably going to take some reinforcement for her to really get this. And so with so many holidays left, I mean, after Easter, there was Memorial Day, and then there was July, and then there was Labor Day, and then there was my sister's birthday, and then there was Halloween, and then Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year, and then Valentine's Day, and then we're back to Easter, and then we're back to Memorial Day, and then we're back to the 4th of July. And for every single one of those holidays, I handcrafted invitations and cakes and favors and games. And every child in the neighborhood came because it was fun. And my sister had, I don't know if she had friends, but she had allies. She had kids who understood that she was quirky and a little bit odd, but they didn't seem to care. And that was enough for me. Now, I will confess, although I should be ashamed of it, but that I would sometimes sit on the front steps of our house while the party was going on, either on the front porch, which was enormous, or in the yard. And I would look across at Ellen's house, seeing her sit on her little tiny porch looking so very sad. And I would grin. Now, it came the second 4th of July. 4th of July is my dad's favorite holiday. And he loved things that sparkled and blew up. And so he'd come home with firecrackers for the grown-ups to light and throw into the water. We lived at the beach, and so there was a lot of water flowing freely. And then there were these wonderful pinwheels he would stick in the sand at the edge of the water. And as dark fell, they would spin around and they would light up the water behind. And then there were these wonderful rockets that shot out these kind of little golden stars that fell down. But the most significant thing at the end of the cookout and the cake, the flag-shaped cake, was each of us would put 3 sparklers between our fingers. My dad would light them, and we would have a parade down to the beach. And Marcy's job was always to be the first in line. And so there we were, and the grown-ups as well as the kids were eating the hot dogs and hamburgers, and it was late in the afternoon, and they finished off the potato salad and the coleslaw and kind of worked their way through the cake and the ice cream, and it was just coming on dark. And my dad had made sure that the firecrackers were in one pocket and the matches were in the other, and he was handing out the sparklers. And I was sitting on the front steps feeling quite proud of myself when my mother came out and stood next to me and said, "Sweetheart, why isn't Ellen at the party?" "Ma, she doesn't want to come." "Well, honey, why wouldn't she want to come? Everybody loves the parties." "Oh, no, Ma, she does not want to come." My mother was not to be gainsaid. My sweet, kind mother walked to the end of our walk and motioned for Ellen to come across the street. Ellen kind of shuffled towards my mother, looking at the ground, afraid to look at me, I'm sure. And then her eyes came up, and there I am on the steps. "No, go, go, go." And the minute my mother looked at me, I just smiled. My mother sat Ellen down on the end of the picnic table and gave her a piece of cake and some ice cream. And then it was time. And so Ellen got at the rear of the line, and my dad put the sparklers in her fingers. And I was furious. And then my little sister, my quirky, odd, smart, peculiar, wonderful sister, walked to the end of the line and put out her hand and took Ellen's and said, "Do you want to walk with me at the beginning of the parade?" There, all by herself, my odd, quirky little sister found her best ally. From then on, Ellen was her protector, in school and out of it. And it continued long after my sister left public school and went to private school, long after they were both old enough to be out of school. Me, I got to give up giving parties. A little ashamed. Sometimes I'm just so right, I'm wrong.
Oh, Christy, your story made me laugh and made me tear up.
Yeah, me too.
And I've heard it before.
I know.
I'm not across you, I promise.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Christy.
How is your sister doing today?
She died quite a while ago.
I'm sorry.
Me too. Me too. I miss her.
So it's time for us to take a little break. There's a little housekeeping detail I need to go over with you. The suggested donation for this performance is $12 a person, but we realize that COVID has affected many people in many ways, including financially. So anything that you can donate would be appreciated. You can, there's a link, I think, in the chat that you can click on, or you can send a check made out, not to me, made out to Story Circle, but send it care of me, and I will deposit it in our bank account, Story Circles. And obviously you got here because you're already on our email list, but in case you're not, here's how you can get on our email list. And, whoops. Just wanted to let you know this program will be rebroadcast on Public Access TV, Open Stage Media's Arts and Education channel, which is run by Proctor's, our umbrella organization. And you can find out more virtual and actual storytelling events on our website. Every page on storycircle@proctors.org in the upper right-hand corner lists events associated with Story Circle. And there's a link of additional storytelling events that you can use to find out other events, like the Interfaith Story Circle is having an event on forgiveness this Tuesday. So second half of Wordplay is about kindness. Fran Berger is from Castleton-on-Hudson and will be sharing the only historical story to be told today. It's called Prunes and Roop. And when I asked what her story would taste like, it was beans cooked over a campfire with biscuits too. I am getting hungry. And it's about prunes, but that's not a food.
And this one isn't.
Please tell us more.
Well, I had the great pleasure to take a vacation in Southwest Colorado. And and there's a huge region in Southwest Colorado called South Park. You know the little cartoon, but that's not, South Park is a huge area. Park County, the county I can't remember the name of, south of it, and areas west, it's a very large area. It's like a huge, huge plain that wind blows across, surrounded by the 14,000 foot mountains, the collegiate peaks. And it's really quite beautiful. And near South Park is a little town called Alma. And
Oh,
Uh-oh.
oh, Fran is frozen because of an internet issue. Hopefully she'll come back to life in a moment.
Oh,
Hmm.
I'm not frozen.
Well, yeah, we are frozen. We're
She
frozen.
is frozen, but open up, move up.
Hmm.
I recognize she said she's frozen.
She doesn't. I mean, she probably does because she's looking at her screen and is TikTok. Okay, when it's my turn, I'm gonna just.
Can someone send Fran a text, maybe?
I don't have my phone here.
Did we lose her from the?
I think maybe she realized that she's signing off and back on.
Well, that would be good. Unfortunately, I don't have my phone. That was silly.
Well, he didn't want it to ring. Same reason I don't have mine.
Oh, there she is.
We're seeing you large, Claire.
Yeah, well, it probably because it's on speaker view.
Okay.
So let me get Fran, let me spotlight Fran again. She's still connecting to the audio. She'll be with us in a moment.
Great.
Okay. Okay.
You're mute. There you go.
Am I here now? Am I back?
Yes.
Perfect.
Right.
I switched from my computer to my phone. My computer said that I was having instability.
Yeah.
Oh,
Happening again.
oh, and your phone is too.
Oh dear. Hmm.
I'm going to do this and close.
Let's see.
I think what we'll do is we'll go on to Margaret while Fran is working out her difficulties.
Okay.
And
So I hope so.
so, Margaret French is from Saratoga Springs and will be telling us a personal story called 2 License Plates, which would taste like funeral potatoes. Da, 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 da.
Okay. Audrey has been my friend for like 50 years. And I know her, I know all her family. So when she called me to tell me that her mother was dying of cancer, I was stricken. I loved her mother. Her mother was a sweet, funny, good person. So Audrey and I, we talked a little bit about what was happening. And I asked her, would she go down state and stay with her mother? Would her mother come up and stay with her? And Audrey said, well,
Well, you know how Joe is. Joe was her husband. He doesn't want me to go down there because he says, who will cook dinners and who will take care of the house? And he doesn't want her to stay with us because he says he doesn't like her very much and she's too ditzy. So what will you do? I said. She said, well, she said, there are these people live around the corner from us and they go to Florida every year. And I've rented her house using my mother's money. And then I can give her dinner and then go back to my house and give dinner to Joe. And then I can come back and stay with my mother all night. And I said, that sounds pretty hard. She says, oh, I can do it. I can manage. I can manage. I always do. And I worried. Audrey is one of those good friends you always worry about. So the arrangement was set up. Now, I lived pretty far away at that time. And Audrey's husband, Joe, didn't approve of me because by then I was divorced. And he thought I was an evil person for destroying my family. And she wasn't supposed to be seeing me at all. But if I was at the little house, he would never know. So I started driving down every Friday night, spending the night with Audrey and her mother, whose name was also Margaret. And I did nothing useful. I just kept them company. And I left my VCR with them. This happened a while back. And we would watch movies. Now, Audrey suggested educational documentaries. But Margaret and I both vetoed that idea. And we decided we preferred romantic comedies. That's what we watched every Friday. And we talked a lot. One night when Audrey's mother had gone to sleep, Audrey shared with me that she had signed away her rights to her husband Joe's pension after he died. They would get more money while he was still alive. I said, Audrey, what are you doing? I said, you've never worked, you won't have a pension of your own, and you signed away your rights to his pension. How will you survive? You won't have enough money. She said, Audrey and I have been friends for 50 years. You know, you speak truth to old friends. And Audrey said, well, it's so hard with Joe. You know, he's so persistent. He said he doesn't want me to be spending his money on some other man. And I worried, how is she going to survive? Well, Audrey's mother, Margaret, was going to be 85 years old. And Audrey wanted to have a birthday party for her, what she knew would be her last birthday party. And she invited her friends to come from downstate. And it was going to be on a Saturday. I usually came on a Friday, but I waited one day. And when I got there, Margaret said to me, well, where were you last night? And I said, well, I'm here now. And Audrey was busy with getting the birthday cake set out and making lunch for everybody. And one by one, everybody was going to Margaret's bedroom and sitting with her for a bit because she was too weak to join people in the living room. I noticed some flowers in the living room, a nice big arrangement of flowers, and I'd been seeing flowers there almost every time I came. And I said to Audrey, who sends the flowers? I was pretty sure it wasn't Joe. And Audrey says, oh, she said, they're from Margaret's, my mother's friend, Robert. You know, he sends flowers to her almost every week. I said, oh, I said, have they got a romance? Your mother is in a romantic? She says, no. She says, don't be silly. Don't be silly. They're just friends. Robert and his wife used to be friends with my parents. Oh, ever since I was a little girl. And after my father died and after Robert's wife died, my mother and Robert stayed friends. I mean, he would like it to be something more. He keeps inviting her out to Seattle where he lives, and he keeps suggesting he come down and visit. She always says no. She says, how would it look? She said, we're too old for that sort of thing. It wouldn't be proper. So she hasn't seen him for years and years, but they write long letters to each other and they talk every few days on the phone. They're so cute. So I was disappointed. It hadn't gone further than that, but that's me. So I went back and I sat with Margaret, Audrey's mother. And Margaret said to me, she said, it's good you come. She took my hand, she gave me a little pat. She said, you're a good friend. She said, I worry about Audrey. She said, Joe is not good. And I didn't think so either, but it wasn't my place to say so. And she said, will you look out for her? And I promised I would, but I wasn't sure what I could do that would be useful. But I made the promise. The day after the birthday party, Margaret went to the hospital, and 2 weeks later, she died. Now, Audrey told me that Robert had called from Seattle every day and read poetry to Margaret. And he said to Audrey, he said, I want the last voice that she hears in this world to be mine. Well, a couple of years later, Joe got sick and he had kidney failure. He needed dialysis, but he didn't want to have dialysis in the hospital, and the insurance wouldn't pay for dialysis at home. So Audrey spent a good chunk of their savings and the money she had from the inheritance from her mother so that Joe could have dialysis at home. And he died. And then a year or two after that, she got a call from a lawyer in Seattle. And the lawyer in Seattle said that she had called because Robert had died. And Audrey said, well, that's too bad. He was my mother's dear friend. And the lawyer said, will you come to the funeral? And Audrey said, well, she said, I really can't afford to come, but I'll send flowers. And there was a pause. The lawyer said, well, what kind of funeral do you think he would like? And this was such a strange question. And Audrey said, I don't know. She said, he was my mother's friend. And
I can't close the mail.
then the lawyer said, do you know who he is? And Audrey said, yes, he's my mother's friend. He's Robert Pratt. And the lawyer said, he's Robert Pratt of Pratt and Whitney, and sole beneficiary. Sole beneficiary. Now, after some minor bequests and after the gifts to the museums, like the precious gem collections, and after the taxes were paid, everything else was going to go to Audrey. I didn't have to worry about how Audrey was going to get by anymore. It meant the 600 acres of prime real estate on an island in the San Juan Islands, the house in Seattle, the land in Utah, the trusts. It would all go to Audrey. You know, to be very honest, I would love to know how much she got. How many millions did she inherit? But there are limits even to what a friend can ask a good friend. When Jay and I got married and went on our honeymoon, we went through Seattle. And Audrey was in Seattle going through the house that Robert had left behind. The lawyer wanted her to decide what, if anything, she wanted to keep and what the lawyers should sell. And I couldn't go in the house. The lawyers didn't permit it, but Audrey talked about it. She said there was a lot of expensive furniture, his clothing, of course. A lot of silver, some mammoth tusks, some rare books signed, letters signed by famous people. It seems that Robert had no brothers, no sisters. His wife and he had no children. But he had a good friend. Her name was Margaret. And I can imagine that in one of those phone calls between Margaret and Robert, she had said the same thing to Robert that she said to me. Look out for her. And Robert, had wanted to take care of his dear friend. There was one other thing that touched me. On an end table, there were 2 toy license plates, those inexpensive things you find in souvenir shops, kind of little license plates that kids put on their tricycles. far as I know, Robert had never traveled to Texas. But Margaret certainly had. Margaret had a granddaughter who lived in Houston. And one license plate said Margaret, and one license plate said Robert. And Robert had kept them for the rest of his days. Thank you.
Wow. Uh, I hope Audrey's quality of life improved once Joe was gone.
Bought a nice condo on a beach in Florida, where she now lives. She paid for her kids' college education. I think she gave away good chunks of it. But I think, yeah, her quality of life improved, definitely.
Thank you for sharing her story, Margaret. And Robert's.
And Robert's. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Fran Berger is going to tell us the rest of her story about prunes and Roop. As soon as she unmutes herself.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Well, Lordy, let's give it a try. Okay. So that area was full of silver mines. And back in the 1860s, well into, I think maybe 1910, 1915-ish at least, it was active silver mining. And not only that, it was the kind where you got a grub stake and got yourself a burrow and you went up into the hills and dug and dug and dug. So there you had it. There was a miner. His name is Rupert. Now, Rupert didn't much care for that name. And so he had everybody call him Roop. And he needed himself a good burrow. And he found a young, strong burrow. And he named that burrow Prunes. And there's a prune that you don't eat. So we had Prunes and Roop. And over the years, they learned a lot of things about each other. And Prunes learned how to understand Roop in a way that few burrows would. They would come in and out of Alma, and they'd come in and out of South Park City. But South Park City was the place where they mostly stayed. And actually, Roop built a cabin there so that he and Prunes would have a place to be come winter when you couldn't be up in those hills no matter what. And he built himself a little stable, snug as could be, so that Prunes would be quite comfortable in those winter times. And all the folks of town knew those two very well, because when they went up into the hills and Roop got low on any kind of supply or things that he needed, what he'd do is he'd put the saddlebags on Prunes, and then he'd write out a list of what it was that he needed. And he'd stick in some silver nuggets and he'd slap him on the rear end and send him back into town. And you know, Prunes could pick his way all the way down the mountain and all the way into the town. And he knew to come right up to the general store. And when he got there, ee-aw, 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 he'd pray until old Mr. Miller came out to see what the list was this time. And the list wouldn't be just for the store. Sometimes he'd go down to the livery stable because there'd be new shoes for Prunes that Roop wanted to put on. And then they'd go down to the mill where they'd get some fresh flour. And kind of go, and sometimes he wanted something to settle his stomach or maybe a little cough medicine. And so they'd go on over to the pharmacy. And almost always they had to stop at the saloon to get just another little flask of whiskey. Well, people all over town would take care of him, and there'd be a silver nugget for everybody. And that's the way they took care of business. They'd load him up, slap him on the rear after they fed him and watered him, and up he'd go, picking his way right back up that mountain. And when he got up there, he'd ee-aw, till Roop came out of wherever he was digging and said, mighty good prunes. And he always made sure that at that grocery, they got extra apples and carrots. So he'd have good treats to give prunes after all that work and that big old trip. Well, this went on year after year. And people love prunes and root. And things moved along pretty well till root started getting a little slow and a little stiff. Everybody got a little slow and stiff, but then he started kind of coughing a lot and had a little trouble breathing. And the countdown for the autumn, because winter was coming, but well, you know, Root couldn't catch his air. And people worried about him. So the livery stable had one of those fancy vehicles, an automobile. And so they cranked that thing up and they took Root down to Denver. They took him to the doctor. And the doctor said, and this is sad news to hear, that Root had developed the TB, tuberculosis. Not a good thing. Not good for prunes, not good for Root. But in Denver, there was a big old sanatorium for people who had TB because for some reason, a whole lot of TB occurred up in the Colorado area, late 1800s, early 1900s. So they had to build themselves a big old sanitarium. And it was one of them high, dry places. You know, it's a whole mile high up in Denver where people could heal because it was drier and they could breathe better. And that's where they took them to heal from the TB. But they wouldn't let them go back up the mountain because altitude, going up them hills, up in that mountain, even going up to Alma or up back to South Park City was too high for your lungs to take it. So Root insisted on getting back up there to pack up his gear and say goodbye to prunes. And he went to every single person in that town who ran a store because prunes knew them all and begged him to take good care of prunes, keep him warm and keep him fed. And he hired Billy Miller, Mr. Miller's son, to make sure that his hay was changed and he was warm and good in the winter. And so he went down to get himself healed. Now, Prunes was inconsolable. But Billy made sure that he took him by to see every single one of those merchants at their back door every morning until they had trained him to visit everybody all by himself. And he knocked that back door open and sure enough, Mrs. Miller come out with them flapjacks. Prunes, it's time for breakfast. She'd give him one flapjack, two flapjacks, slap him on his bottom and say, go next door. Then he'd hit the pharmacy. And sure enough, everybody pretty much lived behind their stores back then. It was a great big old building, but no one had the money to have their own house. So they'd be right back in the back. And then sure enough, he'd get more. And then he'd go on over to the Moors and he'd get more. Over to the livery stable, he'd get more. My Lord, that burro was burping by the time he got back to lay down in the hay and get a good rest. And so it went all the way into the spring. Now come spring, Roop was able to come back up for a little while, but he couldn't make it up into the hills anymore. So he and Prunes just hung around the town and went on long walks together. And Prunes might not have been a working burro at that point, but he was a partner nonetheless. And they had wonderful time in the spring and the summer, but come fall and winter, it was too much. And Roop had to keep going down to Denver to the flatlands so it could make it through breathing because he was over the TB, but his lungs were pretty weakened by it. And so it went on. And knocked that window, that door on open. Mrs. Miller had started. She'd give him a couple of flapjacks, slap him on his bottom, and off he'd go. And he made the rounds over and over. And one heavy wintry blizzard, why Billy had to spend 4 hours digging out the door just to get in there and make sure Prunes was okay. Prunes was all snuggled in that hay. Tell the truth, he was asleep when Billy got in there, because the snow insulated around that little shack of his. So they had many nice times, and they did this 3 to 4 years. But time was moving on, and Prunes was too. And you know what? He got older and older, and it was harder and harder for him to get up and make his rounds. So people started bringing him flapjacks. But not only would they bring him flapjacks, Billy would take him out and walk him around and rub his shoulders, rub his hips, rub his tail. And all the kids in the town got to know him. And, you know, Prunes got invited to school. Prunes got to go to school. He was show and tell for the whole school. It was awesome. Ee-aw, ee-aw. Too much brain. Well, anyway. Prunes got stiffer in the hips and grayer in the muzzle. And one morning, it was the winter time. He had a hard time getting up. And he started wheezing. Burros don't wheeze. But he didn't feel very good. He nuzzled Billy, and then he shook his head and he took a drink from the bucket, and then he laid himself back down. And lay on his side all day long. And he didn't want nothing to eat neither. This lasted 1 day, 2 days, and on the third day, they cranked up that old car, and they made their way down to Denver to get Roop. Looked like Prunes was on his way home. And so Roop packed his bag and ignored the doctor and went right back on up to South Park City. And he went into his cabin where they already had the fire built and ready for him, put his gear away, and made his way out to see Prunes. Prunes lifted his head and gave a weak, "Ee-aw!" And Roop sat down. "Oh, Prunes, Prunes, you look so tired." And he rubbed him twixt his ears, rubbed his muzzle down, rubbed his shoulders. And he just sat there with his back against the barn and just listened and talked. "Ee-aw, ee-aw." Prunes nuzzled him, put his head up against his chest. He took a big old stretch and a big old sigh. And then he laid his head down right there, up against Roop. And Prunes went on to sleep. Well, Prunes didn't wake up from that sleep. Everybody was mighty sad. But everybody knew that burro had the best life anybody could possibly have. And he lived, truly and telling the truth, from 1867 to 1930. And to this day, there's a memorial to Prunes right in South Park City. It talks about Alma, which is one of the places that they went. And it talks about South Park City. But if you look real close, you can see there's Prunes, a burro, 1867 and 1930, Fair Play in Alma, which is really right next to South Park City. Literally, there's only a little fence.
Mhm.
And he'll always, always be remembered.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. What a heartwarming story, and how the community there took care of their own. Two-legged
Amen.
and four-legged.
Yeah.
Now we have Marnie Gillard from Schenectady sharing a Slavic folk tale called The Best Wish, 3 brothers and an angel. We had a devil to begin with, and now we have an angel. Now, Marnie says, to some people, this story would taste bitter, but to others, they'll find it as sweet as a ripe, juicy pear. Marnie, please tell us more.
Thank you. When I was little, I had a fairy tale book, a folk tale book, really. And there were so many things in threes. I loved that there were 3 billy goats and 3 pigs and 3 of this and 3 of that. And recently I was telling a friend I was looking for a story around kindness, and she said, "Oh, I've got just the story. And it's got an angel in it." Well, I had not had a story yet in my life that had an angel in it. Only one, but here it goes. There were 3 brothers, and those 3 brothers, they cherished a beautiful pear tree in their yard. And really, it was like their only treasure. And one of the brothers every day would stay at home and guard the pear tree. And the 2 brothers would go off to work. And then at the end of the night, they'd meet up again. Well, God sent an angel to go talk with those boys and see if they might do something besides hoard those pears. And the angel came, and we'll say he disguised himself as a beggar. And he walked by the pear tree one day, and he saw the oldest brother, and he said, Oh, I'm so hungry. Could you spare one of those delicious looking pears? And the oldest brother hesitated a little, but he said, "Yes, I could give you 1 pear, but I can't give you any more because they belong to my brothers." "Oh, well, thank you, kind sir." And the angel, who was a beggar, walked on by. The second day, the same exact thing happened. The angel, as a beggar in disguise, came by, got 1 pear, but oh no, you can't have more than 1. Same thing the third day. So by the 4th day, the angel was scratching his head and thinking, how am I going to teach these boys something? And he went to their house early in the morning on that 4th day, before any of them had left the house. And he says, this time dressed as a walking monk, a monk wandering through. He had a staff with him, and said, "Do you fellas have dreams for your life?" And they all kind of looked at each other like, "Well, kind of, but what do you mean?" And he said, "Why don't we all go for a walk and see if we can help you to have a life with a little more prosperity and generosity?" And they just looked at each other and thought this sounded interesting. So off they walked, the 3 brothers and the monk, angel. And after a while, they got to a beautiful big river with banks on both sides. And it was just flowing with fresh, cool water. And the monk turned to the oldest brother and said, "If you had 1 wish, what might be your wish for your future?" And the brother said, "Well, I wish this beautiful river, instead of being water, would be wine, and I would be the owner of it. And I'd be able to make a whole business for myself." And the monk raised his staff and he made the sign of the cross. And suddenly the water was wine, and there were wine presses and big barrels to put the wine in, and workers were showing up, and they were all giving lots of attention to the oldest brother, calling him master. And the monk said, "Now you will have a prosperous life. Don't forget God's poor, that he asks us to be generous to." "Oh, I won't," said the brother. And off the monk and the other two brothers walked. And as they got down the road, they saw a big patch of land, but it was covered with pigeons all feeding on whatever they were feeding. And the monk turned to the second brother and said, "What would you like for your wish if I could give you anything you wanted?" "Well, I would like all those pigeons to be turned into sheep. And I could have a sheep farm and I could make cheese." And again, the monk raised his staff and made the sign of the cross. And suddenly there were women milking the sheep and others making cheese, and men were figuring out how they could get meat from these animals, and other people working on getting the wool off their backs. And it was going to be a great business. And the second brother was thrilled because they were giving him a lot of deference. "Oh, master, what can we do next?" And he was prosperous. And as the monk and the younger brother were ready to walk away, the monk turned and reminded him, "Don't forget God's poor, for they are needy, and you are now a rich man." And the brother nodded. I won't. I'll be good. I'll be generous." And so off the monk went with the third brother. Now they were walking quite a ways, and it was a dusty road. And finally the monk turned to the youngest and said, "And what would your wish for your life be?" And the youngest brother, he looked at the monk and said, "I only have one simple wish. I wish to find a woman to be my wife. And I hope that she would be loving and kind." And the monk sort of, felt of his beard and, "Well, I don't know a lot about women, but I have known some really good women in my life. Now, all of the ones, or most of the ones I know, are already married. But I do know of a princess, and I've heard she's a good and a kind woman, and her father is the king. But I've also heard that she has some princes that are her suitors at this time, at least two. And so you'd have to get right down there and get in with the king a little bit and find out, would he approve of you?" And so they walked and walked and walked, and there was this giant palace they came to. And the monk just went right to the front door and met the king and spoke to him about, "This fine young man is looking for a good wife, and I know you have a wonderful daughter, and you're hoping to marry her off?" And the king scratched his beard and said, "Well, yes, I am, but I'm already dealing with these two suitors, and I can't really decide between them. And this boy looks a little dusty and kind of poor in his own way, and I'm not sure he'd be right for my daughter, but if you say he's a good man, I'll try to consider him." And the monk said, the angel, "What if we let heaven decide who would be the best husband for your wonderful daughter?" "I'd like that," said the king. Now, the other two suitors weren't that crazy about it, but they didn't want to get knocked out of the mix. So they said, letting heaven decide, that's okay. That sounds good. And the monk suggested, have one of your workers cut 3 vines from your many grape vines, and just cut ones that are new and young, and have your daughter go right into her own part of the garden and plant all 3 of them. But she should put the name of one of the suitors on each of the branches. So she put the 3 names on, and he said, we will have an answer from heaven by morning, because what I think will happen to those 3 new young branches is one of them will be blossoming, and before you know it, produce wonderful grapes. Well, the king was quite moved by this. The daughter was excited at the thought of what would happen. And sure enough, in the morning when she awoke, she went out to the garden, and there was the one with the youngest brother's name on it. And the other 2 branches were brown and dry. And that 3rd one, that was the one with the brother's name, it had beautiful green leaves and some blossoming sense of the grapes that would be coming as the sun rose higher in the sky. Suddenly, lots of grapes were there at the vine. And the monk said, we have an answer from heaven. And the king said, let's go to church. And off he went with his young daughter, and she and the youngest brother of the 3 were married. And the king gave his blessing, and he felt good about it. And he wished them luck, and blessed them that they have a big future ahead of them. Now, the monk simply took the 2 young people with him, and he went into a place in the forest that was a beautiful glade. The sun came through at moonlight. The moon would be coming through. It was a beautiful spot, but it was just a spot in the forest. And he said to the boy, you have your wish, and I wish you a great life with your beautiful, obviously loving wife. And off the monk, who was the angel, went. And in a year, he was sent to come back and see how his teachings had affected the 3 brothers. And so at first, he disguised himself again as a beggar. And he went to the place where the oldest son had a wonderful business with grapes and wine and all kinds of things that had grown in his business. He was extremely prosperous, but he was very careful to keep an eye on everything. And so when the beggar angel saw him, he went right up and said, "Oh, sir, what a beautiful place you have here. I wonder, could you spare a poor beggar like me a glass of wine? I can't remember ever even tasting good wine." And the oldest brother looked at him. "What kind of a pauper are you? If I gave something to every beggar that came along, I'd be a pauper myself." And the monk, beggar angel, lifted his staff and made a sign of the cross, and everything disappeared, and that river was back again full of cool, clear water, but the whole business of the wine was gone. And he looked the oldest brother in the eye, and he said, "Maybe just go back to your pear tree." The second, as you might imagine, was very similar to the first. He saw, as a beggar, the second son busily walking around his business with the sheep and the well, I think he even had goats at that time too. And he had milk and he had cheese and he had all kinds of things that were coming out as excellent business for himself. He was a well-to-do man. And the angel, again, as a beggar, walked right up to him and said, "My Lord, I imagine you are a kind man. Could you spare a morsel of cheese for a beggar like myself?" "Get out of here, you good for nothing, lazy man. Go make money for yourself if you can't. I don't know if you know how to, but I'm not giving you not one morsel of my cheese." And the angel raised his staff and made the sign of the cross, and it all disappeared, except for lots of pigeons feeding on the field. And he looked the brother in the eye and said, "Maybe just go back to your pear tree." But when he came to look in on the third brother, the youngest brother, he actually was pretty surprised to see that this young man and his lovely wife were very poor. They lived in the glade, but it was a very meager hut. And he could tell they were far from prosperous. But as his bigger self, he walked by and he said, "Good evening. I've been journeying a long way, and I wonder if you might have just room for me to sleep in a corner of your home, just for the one night. And if you had a morsel of food, I wouldn't mind sharing a little supper with you." And instantly the youngest brother said, "Oh, sir, of course we'd give you room." And he looked to his wife and all he did was smile. And she smiled back and she said, "Come, I'll let you sit by the fire. We have a nice cozy space there. You get a little rest before we have dinner. Just rest. I'll go get some water. I'll get some other things that we can add to our larder tonight." And she did get water, but when she poured it in the glasses, it was wine, a rich red wine. And she went to get her loaf that she had made in the oven earlier in the day. And it really wasn't what you would think a loaf of bread would be, because they took the bark from the trees and beat it up and made a kind of bread from that. But when she opened the oven, her eyes got wide and, oh my, I was feeling so sad that I had nothing to give you but the bark, but look at this bread. And she pulled out a beautiful brown wheaten loaf and she cut it up proudly for all of them to share. And there were other things that she brought to the table. And they'd all talk together, just the three of them, and told tales and had a wonderful evening. And as the beggar angel was thanking them and ready to walk on into the world and maybe to do some more good, he looked at them and said, "Because you have been so kind to me, it doesn't go unnoticed in God's eyes. Keep being the kind and loving people you are. You never know, but you might even change the world." And as the beggar angel walked away, ever so slowly but wondrously, that little hut turned into a beautiful home. And when they went inside again, There were things of beauty, tapestry, things made of gold and silver, and they knew their life had been changed by heaven from the very beginning, and they wouldn't spare the poor in any way, but be generous and loving as they were to each other. The three brothers and the best wish.
Thank you, Marnie. And that ends our stories for today. We started out with Claire Nolan and a story about the devil that started out once upon a time, and we ended up with the angel, and they all lived happily ever after. One last round of applause for all the tellers who have brought kindness.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you, Kate, for all you do for us.
Oh, I'm a storytelling evangelist and
Yes, I know.
advocate, and
Maybe both.
it gives me great pleasure to help bring stories to people.
And thanks to our listeners for coming.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, listeners.
And thanks
Everyone.
to Claire Nolan, who's been helping us behind scenes and everywhere. We will be back on the second Sunday of October with stories of grace and forgiveness with some of the tellers you heard today, Margaret French, Claire Nolan, and Beverly Schwartz, and some other tellers from Story Circle, Joe Doolittle, Bonnie Mayan, Sandy Schumann, and myself.